All right, everyone can see my screen, full screened?
Yep.
All right, great. So this section will be talking about frequently asked questions that may cause confusion when you're both preparing for an observation and also at the task of observing itself. Many of these topics have been brought up before in previous talks, but there's still things that come up regularly enough that we want to just address them again, make sure that we have the details. So in preparing for your observation, you're going to want to talk to a support scientist well in advance if you are having any difficulties or uncertainties about your scripts. As Ryan just mentioned, you can always contact one of us based on the topic that we are focused on, if it aligns well with what you're hoping to accomplish. You should also remember that you need to enable your project and the observers who are going to be carrying out that observation on the DSS. Otherwise, it will never actually be enabled. And as Tony had mentioned earlier, you need to be aware that not all of the receivers are up on the telescope at the same time. So you need to check to make sure that with a general guide that the receivers are going to be up in the near future. And you can do that over on the DSS with the link below. And then of course, B-ranked projects only continue through the end of that semester that they are assigned. They don't continue over. So be sure that you get your project able to be scheduled within that first semester if you're B-ranked. Now, when it comes to preparing your scripts for observations, you always want to document if you can. Honestly, this probably applies to any code that you're writing. As much of a pain as it seems, or you don't think it's important now, having that documentation describing what it is you're actually writing out can be helpful either to you in the future or whoever takes over your project down the line. And for observing through Astrid, you want to use the hash or pound sign in order to comment out lines. Also in these scripts, make sure that all the frequencies you're using are in megahertz, not in gigahertz. And of course, you want to make sure that there's no potential RFI in the frequency range that you are going to be observing in, or if it is, that you have a way of handling it. And then of course, as hopefully you guys have gotten some experience last night, it's generally best to calibrate at the beginning of your script rather than at the end. That way, if something goes wrong and you are no longer able to observe with a telescope, the weather gets too bad, you at least have that calibration point. Of course, this can depend on the type of observation you're doing, but this is generally recommended. So when it comes to those point and focus calibration scans, you want to generally choose calibrators from the GBT pointing catalog in the band that you are using. And if possible, also select a source in the VLA Flux manual, which you can then use to compare with later. Now, what was mentioned yesterday, I believe, when it comes to Argus, sometimes you will want to observe at a lower frequency using a particular calibrator and then work your way up from a larger beam down to a smaller beam with your Argus source. Now, when it comes to high frequency or poor weather conditions, you're going to want to generally choose the relaxed heuristics, as Natalie had mentioned in her talk, which you can go under the options menu in the Astrid data display. Of course, heuristics, relaxed heuristics is also generally acceptable for most other projects. So before you start your observations, you need to make sure that your scripts are completed and that they validate in Astrid before you can enable your project, because enabling is simply telling the observatory that you are ready to go within that 24 to 48 hour notice period. Good things to double check before you do finally submit is making sure your LST ranges are correct, as that's going to be what's determining when you can observe when your sources are up in the sky with a minimum elevation of 5 degrees. Be sure to add in all blackout dates on the scheduler, because if you don't include a blackout date that you simply can't show up to observe for, we can't just give that time away. And then make sure your contact information and everyone else in your group, their contact information on the scheduler is up to date, so that if we do need to contact you, we can get a hold of you easily. So before you actually go to observe itself, roughly 30 minutes before your start time, you want to be sure to log in, test your connection, make sure that you're able to access the computer and your internet connection is stable enough that you can log in. And of course, this last point is make sure you know when you're going to be observing. If you get scheduled for a specific time, be sure to put it in your calendar. You don't get any time back if you don't show up for your observations. And once it comes to observing itself, remember, don't use someone else's account, even if their session is open and you're observing from that same location. This is not allowed and could wind up getting your account banned.
However, the observing you've been doing, we will not ban your account for observer workshop training.
This is a slight exception. So when you're doing observations on multiple days, be sure that you don't duplicate a session number, as this can make the data reduction process later on a pain. And finally, hopefully some of you got a chance to do this last night. You can check how your data is going in real time using GBT IDL as well as the Astrid windows. So with that, we can switch it over to Amber to talk about the operators.
All right, so as I believe I told you guys yesterday, I used to be an operator, and we actually have there are 6 operators, and one of our operators is actually here attending the lectures, so he can be my, backup. So Aaron Lovato, who's actually in the window somewhere, who's just said hello. He's our newest operator. So when you get to observe with the GBT, you will most likely get to meet Aaron at some point and have him as your operator. So I don't know if this is all still in the door because it's been a while since I've been in the control room, but we used to have these most commonly asked questions on the operator's door, which actually looked kind of intimidating, but it's actually really funny if you ever get a chance to read them. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you, Jesse. Be nice to them. I know this may seem like obvious, but you do have to understand they're working 12-hour shifts. And, sometimes they're doing more than just, they deal with every telescope on site except for the 40-foot is the only one that they don't worry about because that's the EPO's telescope. So they are dealing with a lot of other things. They're there alone and they're there for a long time. So, sometimes they may not answer you right away. They may, just, be nice to them. They're, there to help you. They're not there to try to make your life more difficult. The operator will always tell you when things are ready. If you have to interrupt to ask them, if you essentially start typing saying, am I ready yet? Am I ready yet? Am I ready yet? Every time you do that, they're going to have to stop and type back to you, no. I don't remember if I showed the other groups, but I know I showed my group last night. If you have the status window open while the operator is preparing for your observations, they actually, if you see where I showed you yesterday where the scan coordinator showed you like antenna, what receiver and stuff like that. If the antenna shows activating, that means that they're either slewing it for you, they're moving the boom, they're moving the turret. So if you see activating, that means that they're doing something. So if you see that, you know that they're in the middle of still setting up for you. If it takes more than 5 to 10 minutes for them to answer you, then you can probably, question them. But in most cases, we technically give you for overhead 15 minutes for the operators to set up. And I don't think it has ever taken 15 minutes. The longest thing is to move the boom in and out, which is 8 minutes. So if it goes more than 10 minutes and you haven't heard from them, then you can ask, but that very rarely will happen. Unless your project is operator run or operator run approved, they cannot run your project for you. So this has happened a couple of times. I've noticed now that somebody will log in and just say, "Can you run my project for me? It's 2 a.m. and I don't want to have to deal with this. Can you just start it for me?" And they cannot do that. There are certain projects, there's certain steps and procedures that you have to go through to get the project to be operator run approved, because the operators are not trained to make sure your data is good. So if they're doing an operator run project, they need like physical examples of what everything should look like, because if your data is getting bad, they're not going to be able to tell you that. You can, if it's the middle of the night, start your project and say, "Hey, everything's up and running. I need to check out for like an hour, or I want to go to bed." And then they'll monitor it for you, but they can't physically run it for you and start it and do all that. And if you have any issues, be clear and specific about what your issues are. There, you can read the exact error message. This is a good resource to ask if you see any warning messages. Don't just say that Guppy's not working. That's a very specific one that I actually had one time, where all they'd say was Guppy's not working. And I'm like, well, okay, so Guppy is our old Pulsar backend, but we don't use that anymore. But at the time, that was all they would tell me, and that was not super helpful. And when I ended up having to call Ryan to get help, it turned out when he finally explained to Ryan what the problem was, I could have fixed it if he had just explained it to me properly. So try to be specific. And even if you don't entirely understand, try to do your best to explain it. No, there aren't any ways to fix all the problems. They are not sorry, so this doesn't really apply to most of you because most of you have never been to the site. But so because the operators are there 24/7, they are kind of like site security, but not really. But if you ever see something on site, if you're there and you see something on site that's going wrong, you can call them, but they're not there to fix every problem. If you see, I don't know, groundhog eating something, you can tell them, but it's not they'll try to contact the appropriate people, but it's not their they're not there to technically be site security, even though they are there because they're the only ones there, especially in the middle of the night. But they'll let you know who you should call, or they will call that person for you. And if you ever forget your key card, which when you come to visit, that'll be something we'll give you. You'll get a temporary card. There is a phone at the front entrance that you can call the operator to let you in if you don't have a key card. All right, go ahead. All right, you guys all heard my my talk and draw soapbox yesterday. Just going to reiterate, don't have a conversation and talk and draw. It's the boy who cried wolf scenario. If you keep talking and that horn keeps honking, the operator is going to ignore you because they're going to assume you're talking to someone else. So when you really need them, they're not going to pay attention to you. Don't ever use that get attention. If you have to have a conversation, which you're more than welcome to, you can create a new group, which I have highlighted there at the bottom, and go into a new group and have a conversation. And then the get attention button, like I said, should never be used. There's really never a purpose for that button. All it does is cause a horn honk, which will just annoy the operator because you're just honking at them. You're not telling them what's going on. So it's better to send them a message and explain to them why you need them than to just push a button, get their attention, and then try to explain it. And also, give them a couple minutes. Like I said, they are people. They are alone in that control room for 12 hours. They do have a right to go to the bathroom, and they do actually have a kitchen where they can cook their dinner, which is not in the control room. So there's times where they might be gone for a couple minutes. If you're really panicked about something, you can call the control room. They can usually hear the phone when it rings from down the hall if they leave the door open a little bit, but they usually don't. But still, they're not going to be gone for very long, some of them, but they are allowed to go to the bathroom. So don't panic if they don't respond right away. But if they do go quite a while without responding, you should give them a call. And I think the phone number, it's the same phone number that was there, but I think it's somewhere. It says 304-456-2341 is the operator's number. All right, go ahead, Jesse. So receiver changes. So this is usually what's happening when you first start an observation. They take time. They cannot be done instantaneously. Just because you've been scheduled to start at 2 o'clock does not mean that that the operator is going to give you the telescope at 2 o'clock. Like I said, when you do your overhead for your proposals, you're technically giving them 15 minutes to do the setup, which in most cases is more than necessary, and you'll get it within a few minutes. But it takes, between 2 to 4 minutes, and that's, if you're moving from one end of the receiver turret to the other, to switch between receivers, and retracting or extending the prime focus or the boom can take 7 to 10 minutes. They cannot change the prime focus feed on the fly. So the prime focus, I can't remember if somebody's explained this. So the prime focus is on a feed arm, and there's a box, and the box there's prime focus 1, prime focus 2. So each one of those boxes then has a feed that can go on the front of it. And so the feeds we usually tend to leave, we leave the box on, but the feed will get changed between 450, 800, 342. Those cannot be changed on the fly. That requires actual mechanics to go up there, and cryogenics people and engineers to go up and change those. So if you have a project that you're doing that can do 800 and 342, you're not going to be able to do both at that time. You're gonna have to do whichever one is currently up on the telescope. I saw Tony said something as well. Yeah, and as Tony says, they have the operators are responsible for operating all the telescopes on site. If there is any other issues, they may not be able to help you with, they may not help you right away because they might be trying to take care of some other issue that you're not aware of. After observing, the polite thing is to not run over your time. However, this does happen. You could be doing an on-off scan and you have 2 minutes left in your scan, and you're going to go 2 minutes over. The polite thing to do is ask the next observer, who should be logged in, if it's all right if you can go over by 2 minutes. If it's a paid project, sometimes they won't let you because they've paid for the time. But in most cases, most people will say that's fine, just take the extra time, because then they assume if it was the other way around, you would do the same for them. But some people will actually plan accordingly and have it so that their projects will actually stop right on the second, which is technically how you should do it. But time is precious. It is very expensive to use the telescope, so try to make sure you're not wasting too much time. There is a way to submit observer comments. You should submit observer comments after your observation, especially if you've had a concern or a problem or something that you noticed. This is how we know that problems exist, and we can try to fix them before you observe again. If you don't tell us that there's a problem, we can't help you. If you're just like, well, everything looks fine, but this is kind of a little off, if you don't tell us, we can't do anything about it, because in a lot of cases, we might not notice it. You should also always analyze your data in a timely manner. You should be doing brief checks while you're actually observing, but don't wait, I'm a terrible example of this, 4 years to actually look at data, because then if something's wrong with it, we can't go back and give you time. We can't correct the problem because the project has ended 4 years ago. I was working on a project with Will that he took the data for, and we didn't do that in a timely manner. So I'm guilty of that. It does happen, just try not to do it. Check for any problems you might need to work around for your next observing session. So like I explained to my group last night, Tony's gonna, give you time in increments. If you have like a 20-hour project, he's not gonna give you all 20 hours at one time. And this might seem odd, but I mean, first of all, who wants to sit there for 20 hours straight? And secondly, if you have an issue in the beginning, so when you do your first session, which might be 2 hours, 5 hours, and you're sitting there and then you do, afterwards you're checking your data more in depth and you see there's a problem, you can fix that for the next time. I've had some observers who actually will disable their projects after their first observing session to make sure that everything looks good before they continue to use the time, because they don't want to use all that time and then find out that something was wrong in the beginning that might be small and they didn't notice it. Even if it was your last observation, we want to know if there were any issues or any problems. So even if it's the last time you're going to be observing for a while, we still want to hear from you. We still want to know what you thought. Was there anything that could be done better? This is how we can make changes if you guys tell us how things are working for you. All right, Jesse, go ahead. So common issues with H1 observations and mapping. You should always do I will say, and there are certain people who will argue with me, that you should always do a point focus before, and not even necessarily because you need to calibrate the data to make, or like, you know, adjust the, like for L band, most people will say you don't need to, or for pulsars, you don't need to. But I view it as a sanity check more than just a, let me get a correction. If something, there's been a lot of times where you'll be doing a point focus and we'll notice something is wrong, or somebody will notice something's wrong, even the operator can notice something is wrong, and they'll catch it before you even start observing. So I personally will always say you should always do a point, or at least a point. You don't necessarily have to do a focus. But I would always say you should always do a point. It's kind of a sanity check to keep yourself from, you know, wasting time afterwards, because, you know, and as Tony says, if you use a known source, especially, we'll be able to tell if something's wrong. You should also take a short spectrum on a known source. Oh, that's actually was the next thing, to make sure things look okay. This is kind of the same as pointing, but some people will do it with like make an on-off pair or something. Check that a map is starting and ending position, and the spacing is correct. So like last night, my group did a map and we didn't finish our second map. So now if we were to run that map again, we want to make sure we don't want to start from the beginning of the map. We need to go in and actually we would have to go in and adjust the map. I don't remember, we were at like row 6 or 7 or something. So we want to go in and edit our script. So when we run it again, we don't waste time retaking the lines of the map we've already done. We'll start where we left off. And that's, you know, something that happens quite often. Most people can't finish their whole map in one session sometimes. And the GBT, as you've probably heard, like I think a dozen times at this point, the GBT point function is a Gaussian. Spread function it's not a square or circular. Go ahead, Jesse. Pulsar observing. So I don't know much about pulsar observing, and Ryan or Bren or Andrew can tell me if this is also accurate, but you should not be rebalancing between a calibration scan and of the noise diode and the science scan on a pulsar of interest. And then make sure that the Vegas.fold par file parameter in Astrid points to the correct file on disk. I can't entirely tell you what that means, but that's what I believe I had Ryan approve last year. All right, Jesse, go ahead. Weather issues. These are more operator kind of pertaining things. So I'm assuming somebody at some point had brought this up and I might not have been perfectly paying attention, but if there's a lot of snow, the operators will halt your observations and put the telescope in what's called snow dump. So even if your lower frequency in snow is not going to affect you all that much, we still don't want snow to build up on the dish. We have these very sensitive panels. So even if you're not necessarily affected by snow, if we think that it's going to start to build up ice and stuff like that, they're going to stop you so that they can tilt the dish over so that more stuff doesn't accumulate on it. And then also because if we can do higher frequency later, and as Tony said, you get, higher frequency stuff can be limited by the weather. If it's going to be super clear after a snowstorm, we don't want a whole bunch of snow on the dish because then we can't do our high frequency. I think I mentioned it yesterday. If temperatures reach below 17 degrees Fahrenheit, the slew rate will go to half rate, which means that it will just move twice as slow. The operator should tell you this, and there will always be a message in the message window to let you know that it's in half rate. And this is true. I think it was actually like this yesterday while we were doing our lectures yesterday. But so this is specifically true from December to February. And then once it reaches above 17, they can go back to full rate again. Winds are another big issue that we have. The GBT is an open structure. And I believe I actually mentioned this before. So if there are sustained winds that are 35 miles an hour or greater, or a gust of wind that's 40 miles an hour or greater, they will stop the telescope. They will stow it. They put it in what's called survival mode. So it's actually, and they'll position it so that it's the wind's not hitting it directly and stuff like that. Some higher frequency stuff will actually not be able to observe if there's like more than 5 mile an hour winds because their beam is so small that the tip of the telescope might move a bit. And so what will happen is if they stow you for winds, they have a timer from the first time. They'll get an alarm. So they're hearing an alarm that tells them that this happens. They're not just noticing it. When it hits these speeds, it alarms them to tell them. And the moment the alarm goes off, it starts a timer on their screen. And what they're trying to do is they're waiting 15 minutes. It has to go 15 minutes without having one of these warnings go off before they will resume observing. And then there is, of course, always the chance that if it's a very windy day, it could go 15 minutes and then do it again. So winds can be kind of a pain, but you do usually get that time back. And it can be frustrating, but you can always just say, have the operator call me when the winds are back and stuff, or when the winds have died down and stuff. The operator only stops for winds when it reaches this limit. They will not warn you if the wind will, so they can't tell you if you're higher frequency and you're doing W band and it's like 20-mile-an-hour winds. It's a good bet that your observations are not going to be super great, but they don't know, the operator, it's not their job to know that. And it's not their job to determine for you whether or not weather is affecting your observations. You have the right to always say that I'm not getting good data because of the weather. Can you do a filler project? You're allowed to say that, but the operator can't make that choice for you. But you can ask them to stop your time, and then they'll give Tony a call and get a filler project. The last weather note to also think of is that if the temperature ever reaches minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, the GBT will stop altogether. So as I explained yesterday, the half rate is because the oil, the lubricant, when it reaches a certain temperature will no longer be a lubricant, it becomes a glue. So that's why we move at half rate. And once it reaches below minus 10, it essentially can't move at all. So we will actually stop the antenna and we won't resume moving again until it reaches above 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And the operator will try to possibly track the sun and stuff to see if they can, get things. Well, I guess that's more so for snow dump and stuff like that. But yeah, if it gets too cold, then we do actually have to stop altogether. All right, Jesse. Other frequent issues. Blanking. If a lot of your data is being blanked, this usually means your switching frequency is too small. There's a table in the observer's guide that will tell you the different values of these. I actually have this printed out and hanging, not that I've seen it in a while, in my office next to my desk so I can see it. If you're not reaching your desired sensitivity, remember effective integration time does not equal observing time. This can be a bit of a confusion for people sometimes, especially if you're doing mapping. Do they use the effective time? Do they use the total integration time? Do they use the total time on source? So I don't believe you ever use the effective integration time. You should be using either the total or the time on source. Go ahead, Jesse. And that's it. And I guess then, because it is frequently asked questions, we do have like 2 minutes. Is there any questions that you guys have that came up last night or that you've just been thinking about that is related to anything? It doesn't have to be related to something specific in my talk. It could be anything at this point. Chat. It's from Tony. Oh, I guess I'll just tell you quickly. So there's like I said, there's 6 operators, and their names are Aaron, who's here. We have Tyler, Greg, Dave, and Brandon. Wait, Brandon and Rob. Sorry. I was like, wait, that's only 5. I miscounted. So that's their name, and they should tell you when they log in, or when you log in, who they are. And you'll see their names in the in Asteroid. Yeah, I forgot to tell you guys what their names were. All right, there are no questions.
Thank you, Amber and Jesse. We're now going into a break. If Amber and Jesse can stick around just for a couple minutes in case anyone has any other questions for the first 5 minutes of the break. Thank you. And otherwise, we will start back up in 30 minutes in our breakout rooms for some observation planning between now and your observations tonight.
Will we be coming back to this Zoom room or go to our group rooms that we used last night?
So good question. You will be in this Zoom room for the next session here from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern time. And then your observations, you'll be on those individual Zoom rooms. Thanks for asking, DK.
I have a question. When is it recommended to use the noise diode calibration?
Can you repeat that? I missed part of it. Sorry, it cut out.
When is it recommended to make some noise diode calibration to observe the noise diode?
When,
So you mean
Not
like
noise diode, sorry.
yeah, when to
I
use
was gonna say,
it.
yeah, you mean the noise diode. So I mean, I think other than pulsar observations, you pretty much always have the noise diode on. Though Tony probably I can see he probably knows better than me, so he should answer that.
Yeah, for Spectraline or Continuum, they're typically used all the time. They're just part of the data analysis that let you follow gain variations from, say, clouds going through the beam on much shorter time scales than it takes for these things to vary. So you can follow those a lot more. But for things like pulsar observations and some continuum mapping or polarization observations, you'd only fire the noise diodes for a little bit before you take most of your data and maybe then afterwards. So in those cases, it's tougher to deal with the changes from the noise diode turning on and off all the time.
Okay, thanks.
We also don't ever use the noise diode for radar observations. I thought of that. Sorry.
Yeah, and you'll get a little bit more information on a lot of those, both in the mapping calculator page itself and in the observer's guide. You can look up information about why it's more useful to use the noise diode or the Doppler tracking and the like.
Okay, thanks.
All right, well, it doesn't seem like there are any other serious questions for right now. So if any of you think of something that you want to ask later, then feel free to contact any of us or go to your group friend and we can help answer those questions.
Thank you very much, Jesse and Amber.
Thanks, guys.